It's me again for day 2 of lectures about our reformer. So, as we discussed in the previous lecture, we were talking about the goal of the propaganda movement. Can you tell me what the goal is? Was it separation or was it equality? I hope you said equality because that's right. Okay. It was not separation, it was equality. And then there were ilustrados. Who were the ilustrados? Were they educated or uneducated? I hope you said educated. This is so lame. I wish I could hear your voices. I miss your voices. Okay, so here we were talking about Jose Rizal yesterday. I wish I could really talk to you about him more. It would have been very nice if I could be there and if I could be in front of you so that we can talk about Jose Rizal more. But of course, that is not possible right now. Maybe one day we will be given an opportunity to speak of Jose Rizal face to face. But now, this will have to do. So, our next hero that we are going to discuss is Marcelo del Pilar. Okay, so Marcelo H. del Pilar, his code name was Pilaridel. Okay, Pilaridel was his pseudonym or his code name, and he is one of the great ilustrados. Okay, so uh, Marcelo H. del Pilar was born into a wealthy family. So he came actually from a rich family and he studied to be a lawyer. So if Rizal was a doctor, an eye doctor, Marcelo H. Del Pilar was a lawyer. Okay, his father was actually a gobernadorcillo. You know that a gobernadorcillo is a position that Filipinos don't really attain to, and it is probably because Marcelo H. Del Pilar was already a mestizo. He was half Filipino, half not exactly half, but he had Spanish blood already. So his father became a gobernadorcillo. And very interesting because his mother, if his father came from Spanish blood, his mother actually was Principalia. And you know what Principalia is? Principalia is Filipinos who came from the line of Dato. So his mom actually came from the line of Datos, which is so very interesting for Marcelo H. del Pilar, right? His dad was a gobernadorcillo thrice, and his mom came from a line of datos. So I guess he was used to the ruling class. Okay, now actually, during the time of the propaganda movement, the Spaniards were more afraid of Marcelo H. del Pilar than they were afraid of Rizal because I think Marcelo H. del Pilar was a louder speaker than Rizal and a stronger speaker. I think Rizal developed his strong voice only when he went abroad, but Marcelo H. del Pilar was already very loud in terms of speaking against the French. French? Did I say French? I don't know why I said French, but I said French. Speaking against the Spaniards while he was still in the Philippines. Okay, so the Spaniards actually feared him more than they feared Rizal. Now, here are some of the works of Marcelo H. del Pilar. So, La Soberania Monacal. Okay, so as you can see, this is written in Spanish. This is the monastic sovereignty in the Philippines, wherein he says that it is not government ruling the Philippines, but it is the monastic group or the priests. It's not the governor general is not the power in the priests, and those are very strong words to say. Now, we also have another one of his writings, Sagot ng Espanya sa Hibik ng Pilipinas, or the answer of Spain to the cry of the Philippines. We have Dasalan at Tuksohan, and we have Raflairokrasya, wherein he asserts again that we were ruled by priests. We were not ruled by the Spanish government, but it was priests. But these were very controversial writings, right? But I think the most popular thing that Marcelo H. Del Pilar was known for was his newspaper, was a newspaper that he began, which is the Diaryong Tagalog, okay? Diaryong Tagalog. It was the first time that a newspaper was written in Tagalog, and his purpose for this is so that the common people would understand it. Because he did not want the common people to be, we were discussing this before, wherein the Spaniards never taught us the Spanish language. So when he when he did Diario to be in the language that the Filipinos, it would be more understandable. So the Spaniards really did not like this because this was informing us about the real situation. It was opening eyes everywhere. They hated him. They hated this is why the Spaniards really did not like Marcelo H. Del Pilar. Okay, now I know you know this. Do you? But his when because of the Diaryong Tagalog, the Spaniards wanted to Del Pilar, so he had to flee. He escaped to Spain to escape the persecution of the Spaniards. And when he went to Spain, he became the editor of a Spanish newspaper which was begun by the Ilustrados who were already in Spain. He took over as editor. Graciano Lopez Jaena, whom we will discuss later, was the first editor of La Solidaridad. But when Marcelo H. Del Pilar came over to Spain, he took over um, as the editor of La Solidaridad. Now, Quincenario, Quincenario Democrático, this is a quarterly newspaper wherein um, these ilustrados would try to distribute information to the Spanish people about the real situation in the Philippines. They wanted this because a lot of the Spaniards did not really know what was going on, particularly the ordinary people. They were like, Anak, what's going on there? Or I thought it was happy times in the Philippines, and the La Solidaridad was kind of like, no, Spaniards, our countrymen are being oppressed there. They do not have rights. They're very luoy in the Philippines. So this was actually something that they wanted to inform the Spaniards about, so that the Spaniards would be able to help them in their cause of reform. Now, the La Solidaridad eventually ran out of funds because this was not funded by anyone particularly particularly rich, so they were really dependent on advertisements. They were dependent on the money of Ilustrados who kept donating, but then eventually this money ran out. Marcelo H. Del Pilar, since he came from a wealthy family and he had some baon money, he even gave some of his funds to the La Solidaridad, and this did not turn out very well for Del Pilar because eventually his funds also ran out. Like my iPad is not cooperating, because eventually his funds did run out in order for them to be able to continue La Solidaridad. And he became so very, very, very poor in Spain. He was known, whenever it was a particularly cold season in Spain, he would pick up cigarette butts from the ground in order to be able to smoke. Not particularly because he was addicted to cigarette smoking, but because it helped him keep warm. So that's how low he became. Can you imagine? Kaloy. And this was so that the Filipinos will be free. So he would pick up cigarette butts. He would try to find cigarette butts all over Madrid, and he would kind of smoke them in order to keep warm. And then after he um I think he was starving, he was cold, he had no money, and I think it was at this point that Marcelo H. Del Pilar said, you know what, maybe he changed his mind. The Ilustrado movement was supposed to be equality with Spain, right? But eventually he got so frustrated, nobody was listening to him. So he was kind of like, you know what, it might as well be that we will separate with Spain. Spain. We might as well overthrow Spain. Let's pick up weapons. Let's kill Spaniards. Let's start being violent. And this was actually the point that Rizal was like, you know what, man, if that's how you're going to think, then we can't be in the same team anymore. So Rizal stayed in the Ilustrado, kind of let's fight for equality. But Marcelo H. Del Pilar wanted a more radical movement already, and uh, he died a very sad death. He died of starvation. Uh, Even talking about it kind of makes me sad because he was in Madrid trying to fight for the oppressed Filipinos, and then he died because of starvation. That's not a very happy thing. He died of starvation in Spain, and his also he contracted tuberculosis, which is it's a respiratory disease. And then he had tuberculosis, and then he died of starvation. And then when he died in Madrid, since he had a wealthy family, if you can remember, they were able to take his body from Madrid and had it brought back to the Philippines, where he would be buried in his motherland. But man, what a way to go. But his contribution to journalism, his contribution to newspapers earned him the name of the father of Philippine journalism. He is the father of Philippine journalism. He revolutionized newspapers so much. Like a lot of the tips and the tricks of the trade that Marcelo H. Del Pilar established as a newspaper guy, people in the newspaper business are still using until now. And that's sad. It's so sad. I really hate talking about it. It really makes me sad, kind of imagining Marcelo H. Del Pilar spending his own money for La Solidaridad and ended up broke and starving with tuberculosis. So it was really sad. So he was the first. He was the first of the three big Ilustrados, the three big Ilustrado names. We already discussed the first one, Jose Rizal, and then Marcelo H. Del Pilar. They're called the triumvirate. The triumvirate of the Ilustrado or the propaganda movement. And he was the first to die. It's still in the year 1896, okay? Because all three of them, it's so weird because these three men, Marcelo H. Del Pilar, Graciano Lopez Jaena, and Rizal all died in the same year. They were the biggest names of the Ilustrado or the Reform movement, but they all died in the same year. And the first to go was Marcelo H. Del Pilar, the father of Philippine journalism. Now, the third name of the Ilustrado movement is Graciano Lopez Jaena. Now, as you can see, he does not have a code name because he was not a writer in particular. He wrote stuff, but not in the same level as Rizal or Marcelo H. Del Pilar. Now, Graciano Lopez Jaena, unlike Rizal and Del Pilar, was born to a very poor family. He was born to a poor family. He really wanted to be a doctor, but because of financial reasons, he could not. His family could not support his dreams of becoming a doctor. So he had to stop schooling, and he took an apprenticeship at a hospital. Apprenticeship is he's kind of like he volunteered. He volunteered in a hospital, and then some of the doctors kind of taught him how to do stuff here and there. So he would go to he would go to the hospital, and he would practice. And this was in his hometown in Ilocos, and then oh sorry, Iloilo. And then after that, so he would just be an apprentice there. One day, there was a man that was really beat up. He had bruises all over. I mean, he was really dying because he was beat up. Like it was so obvious. There were marks of kicks and punches and everything. And then when Graciano asked him, "Ngamurag, who did this to you? What happened? This is not an accident. It's not like you fell from a coconut tree and this is what it's so obvious somebody beat you up. Who did this?" And then the man, of course, he was already dying. He was so weak. He said that the Spanish alcalde mayor of his town did it to him. And he said, but please don't tell anyone because I don't want him. I don't want him to kill my family. Just say that I died like of natural causes. So Graciano, that really bothered Graciano Lopez Jaena. So he was really determined to make a report and say, no, there was a man who died in the hospital today because he got beat up by a Spanish alcalde mayor. And then after that, um, he was even um, when the alcalde mayor heard that some guy in the hospital is determined of the truth, to tell the truth, the alcalde mayor even threatened Graciano Lopez Jaena and said, Graciano, you better not tell people that it was because of my actions that made that poor Filipino Indio die. You better say that he died of natural causes. If not, then I am going to do to you what I did to him. And this really made Graciano Lopez Jaena just got so mad. And he was like, oh man, when are the Spaniards going to stop oppressing Filipinos? Why are they treating us like we are not humans? Why do they feel like they are better than us all the time? So this is like Graciano really got so mad at him, but his family got scared because now the alcalde mayor wanted to kill Graciano Lopez Jaena. So they were so poor, but they borrowed money and everything, and they sent Graciano Lopez Jaena to Spain. Okay, now when he went to Spain, he wrote Fray Botod. Now, Fray Botod is kind of like a satire. Now, let me tell you what a satire is. Satire is Satire. A satire is a funny story, but when you're done reading a satire or when you're done watching a satire na play, you'll be like, hey, wait a second, there was a hidden message lagi about that. You're like, it makes you think. It's a criticism. It's kind of like besides makes you okay. An example of a satire is I saw this comedy show wherein they showed a poor pregnant woman, a Filipino poor pregnant woman. She ran to the ER and said, "Please help me! I'm about to give birth. My baby is popping out of my belly." And then they're like, you have to give money first. You have to deposit the money. But she was like, I don't have money. Like, I really don't have money. And the doctors ignored her. So she was able to give birth under the table. It was done in a very funny way. So people were laughing because it was so funny. And then after that, so she was giving birth under the table. No, while she was giving birth under the table, a very rich woman came to the ER and she was like, oh, my toe hurts. Like, there's something stuck in my toe and it's so painful. And because she was rich and she was able to pay the deposit and everything, all the doctors of the emergency room went to her and treated her like she was like this really, really important patient. That they were like, oh, mom, what happened to you? Yeah, oh, your toe hurts. While they were taking care of this rich woman's toe, the poor old, not old, the poor Filipina lady was giving birth under the table. So anyway, after the whole commotion, the Filipina had a baby already, and she was gonna walk out of the ER. When she was gonna walk out of the ER, the guard stopped her and said, "Ma'am, you have to pay first. You can't leave the hospital. You have to pay first because you gave birth in the hospital." And then anyway, that was kind of like the end. People laughed, but then after they laughed, they were kind of like, "Hey, that actually happens sometimes. That just because you're poor, you're not given the same service as a rich person." Even if your emergency is bigger. So that's kind of like a satire. I know I strayed really, really far, but I really want you to understand what a satire is. Cristiano Lopez Jaena made a satire, and it was Frey Botod. If you can see Frey Botod, this is Frey. Oh, wait, let me get moving the chat bubble here. So the laser pointer is okay. This is Frey Botod. He was a very, very fat priest. A priest who was very fat. He was always eating. People were so shocked that he was always eating, and then it was so funny because he couldn't even walk properly. People would laugh, and then when the Spaniards would be like, ho, 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 they were like, hey, is he talking about me? And then the Spaniards got offended. But then that was Graciano Lopez Jaena's, I guess, skill. He was very good at presenting satires. Now, when he was, so this is actually one of the reasons why he got in trouble also in the Philippines. That's why he had to move to Spain. Now, when he was in Spain, he attended a lecture. Okay, now, when he attended a lecture in Madrid in 1882, there was an International Congress of Commercial Geography. And this man, his name again is Fray Ramon Martinez Vigil. Maybe we're related, maybe we're not, I don't know. But Fray Ramon Martinez Vigil, he stood up in this conference and he was talking about how Spain was very benevolent. You know that word? Benevolent is gracious. How Spain is very helpful. How Spain is improving the lives of the barbaric Filipinos. He kept yaw-yaw and he did not know that Graciano Lopez Jaena was in the audience. Like an actual Filipino who experienced the exact opposite of what he said, you know, the oppression and Graciano Lopez Jaena could not stand it. He was like a bakakon. This guy is such a liar. Graciano Lopez Jaena could not take it anymore. He stood up in the middle of this conference and he was like, that man is a liar. This is what the Spaniards are doing in the Philippines. And then he just started giving this speech. He was only part of the audience and people were like, ooh, burn. They were like, oh, burn Fray Martinez. He was, and he spoke in Spanish. He spoke in like perfect Spanish and he was saying like, and then he was saying stuff like, you know, that is not true, that is not true, and we are being abused, we are being abused in Spain, we are being oppressed in Spain. And he was so embarrassed, this guy, si Fray Ramon Vigil, and he was so embarrassed. But then now the other Spaniards were like looking at Graciano Lopez Jaena and they were so impressed with him. You know, they were so impressed with him. They stood up and they clapped their hands and go, whoa, you're so maayo gyud. You're so maayo, you're so good at speaking. So now we have Rizal, who was the writer. He was kind of like the celebrity. We had Marcelo H. Del Pilar, who was the journalist. And now we have Graciano Lopez Jaena, the orator. The orator is like a public speaker. He was so good at that. And when these Spaniards who were hearing him, they were like, oh, you're so impressive. Why don't you speak at another conference and you talk about the plants and animals in the Philippines? Okay. Why don't you talk about how beautiful the Philippines is? And so Graciano Lopez Jaena said, okay. So he prepared his speech. So during this Exposition Universal de Barcelona, when he went there and he spoke about the beauty of the flora and fauna. Flora is plant, fauna is animal. The flora and fauna of the Philippines. When he was talking about it, he was so eloquent. He did it so well and he did it with so much emotion that the people hearing about plants and animals started to cry. They were like, oh my gosh, Philippines, yun is so nice, yun. And then they were in tears and they were like, ako yawa. So Graciano Lopez Jaena had a reputation of being this excellent public speaker. But it's so sad again because every time Lopez Jaena would give speeches like this, and I mentioned his name already earlier, he was the first editor of La Solidaridad. He did not get a salary for, because you have to understand that La Solidaridad was a very poor newspaper. Marcelo H. Del Pilar had to give some of his money. And then Graciano Lopez Jaena came from a poor family pagyud. So, so sad again. So Graciano Lopez Jaena, the only thing that he got in return for his services for La Solidaridad was lodging. Okay, lodging and food, some food and lodging. But then, when La Solidaridad lost more and more money, it could not even afford to pay for his food and lodging, and he would it's really sad. So Graciano Lopez Jaena eventually died again of starvation because he was just so poor. he was in Barcelona. If Marcelo H. Del Pilar was in Madrid, he died in Barcelona. Graciano Lopez Jaena died there. Now, we cannot also credit him with so much good without saying the bad things about him, because actually one of the reasons why Graciano Lopez Jaena lost so much money is because he kept drinking. He had a drinking problem. He really had he had a bad habit of drinking, and people people kind of, even Rizal implored him to stop doing that, but then he wouldn't, and so he lost a lot of his money, and now he died in Barcelona, starved and with tuberculosis again. But the thing is, when he died in Barcelona, he was buried in a pauper's grave, meaning like a poor man's grave. And since his family in the Philippines was so poor, they could not afford to get his body. So his body is still buried in Barcelona. He was not even he's not even home. You know, he's not buried in his motherland. So that is where Graciano Lopez Jaena is, and he is still there. He is still there until now. And he also died in 1896. Actually, I think I was mistaken. I said Marcelo died first, Graciano died first, and then Marcelo, and then Jose. I'm sorry about that. That was my bad. Graciano Lopez Jaena died first, and then Marcelo, and then Jose Rizal, all in the same year, in the year 1896. So hopefully, maybe our government will one day find funds to kind of exhume Graciano Lopez Jaena's bones in Barcelona and maybe bring it here. I don't know. I know we have other problems, particularly now, but that would be a nice thing, I think, to do. Okay. So now we go to Antonio Luna. Okay, now, disclaimer first with Antonio Luna. I really do not think that Antonio Luna should be considered as one of our heroes, because Antonio Luna didn't do much in terms of pushing the Ilustrado movement forward. But I wanted to include him because he did write some stuff for Diaryong Tagalog. But then he is actually and La Solidaridad, I mean, he wrote stuff for La Solidaridad when he was in Europe, because he was actually a chemist. He was a very good chemist, and then he worked in Europe for for a long time. That's why he met Silang Rizal. I will show you pictures later of Silang Rizal also. And he studied mga virus, communicable diseases, and all of that. But here's a picture of Antonio Luna and his these are the Luna brothers here. So this would be Jose Rizal. They were fencing buddies and all of that. But the thing about Luna is he was actually the one who got Rizal, kind of pushed the envelope with the Rizal killing, because when the Spaniards were looking for a way to pin Rizal. Anyway, I don't want to spoiler alert because we are going to talk about this again later, but um, during the death of Rizal, but which is the next module. But Antonio Luna actually was the reason why the Spaniards had a reason to arrest Rizal and to sign his death warrant. So, not because Antonio Luna was a traitor, but it was because he was careless with his words. So, we're going to talk about that later. Okay, now, so that's Antonio Luna. And here is, I think this is a clip of, yeah.
Sinasabi ng iba, hinahanap nila. Pero ba't hindi ka kompromiso? Sinusuka ko hindi maano rin. Pero ang kompromiso, wala pa tayong karapatang magbuhay ng malaya.
America is destined for better deeds, and who will or can set limits to our onward march.
Mapapalawak natin ang ating ekonomiya kung makikipagtalakan tayo sa kanila. Negosyo o kalayaan, bayan o sarili, pumili ka!
Gusto ng ilang politiko at negosyante ang iyong pangangalakan. Masyado ka bang mayabang? Malahas.
Walang nakaangat sa batas kahit na presidente.
General, baka may makatinig. Hindi makinig sila. Maliw talaga. Ang gagawin natin sa kanya. Subukan mo namang huliin ang akin. Sabihin mo sa ating mga babae na hindi nakakamit ng kalayaan sa pag-aaruga sa kanilang mga mahal sa buhay. Kailangan nilang magbahay. Ano pong kabayaran? Dugo at pawis. Kailangan nilang tumalon sa kawalan. Sandali siya lang ang tao! Mag-aaksihin ang bala! Bago! Si Antonio, abusado, mayabang.
Sa pagitan ng kapatid.
Sino na ang pinakabago sa inyo? Mga kapatid, tayo mas malaking taway kaysa ng Amerikano. Ang ating sarili.
Ooh. Okay, so I just showed that clip because there is a movie of General Luna. It's actually on Netflix. The other movie that's historically based is Goyo. Also, it's also on Netflix. So, with your parents, maybe you can watch that, not by yourself. You have to ask your parents also. It's not a requirement. I didn't just give an assignment. I'm just saying that these movies are available on Netflix. So, General Luna, we're gonna talk about his story later on. And then this is actually the last ilustrado that we are going to talk about. He is Mariano Ponce. He's the third one in the picture. His pseudonyms are Tikbalang, Naming, o Kalipolako. Okay, he was a doctor and he met Rizal and the others in Madrid while he was studying medicine there. And he was actually the co-founder of La Solidaridad. So the reason why La Solidaridad exists was because of Mariano Ponce. He was in charge of the history section, which would have been the section I would be in charge of if I were part, but I'm not. Wishful thinking. So, what's interesting about Mariano Ponce is, and this is going to be revisited. I'm just kind of introducing you to our heroes. Is when he met Sun Yat-sen, and Sun Yat-sen is the father of Chinese nationalism. He was against communism, and we're going to discuss that again at another time. So, those were our ilustrados. Okay, you can again rewind this lecture if you want. So we had the three greats, um, Del Pilar, Jaena, and Rizal, and we have, of course, Mariano Ponce. Here are some of the pictures of ilustrados who were in Spain. This is actually one of my favorite pictures of Rizal. Do you see Rizal here playing dress up? I don't know what he's up to there, but I find this picture very, very funny. And we have here also a picture of Juan Luna and Rizal, of course, fencing. If they had TikTok, I think they would have had TikTok yun, like promise. Like I really think like this, mag-TikTok yun to si Rizal and si I really think they would have, because these men were young. I mean, these men were not oldies, but they were really young. They were the millennials of their time, I guess. But they used their gifts for the benefit of the country. So that is the reform movement. That ends my lecture. I know I said 3 parts, but it turns out I only needed 2 parts for this. I will link again some videos that I would want you to watch, and I will also be assigning a worksheet after this. So, grade 5, I hope you enjoyed. I miss you guys. I keep saying that, but I really, really do. I think lecturing is one of the funnest parts of being a teacher, and it's sad for me as a teacher to not be able to do that in person. So that ends our lecture. Again, please rewind if there was something you did not understand, or comment or message, whatever.